After a night with his mistress, the Count returned home, but his wife and baby were gone. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. The night had been long, its pleasures fleeting. The Count's carriage rolled through the pale mist before dawn, the horse's hooves striking hollow against the stones. Edward Ashford sat within, motionless, the faint scent of perfume still clinging to his coat. He could not shake it off, nor the memory of Lydia's laughter echoing against silk and candlelight. He told himself it was nothing. One night of weakness. One lapse, easily buried beneath the weight of his duties and name. When the carriage turned down the familiar lane toward Ashford Manor, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The world outside was silver with fog. The manor's high windows were dark, except for one faint glow in the upper wing, the nursery perhaps. He smiled faintly at the thought of his son's restless cries. Margaret always rose at the first sound, her hair loose, her hands gentle. For a moment he imagined her waiting for him as she always did, pretending not to notice the hour or the faint smell of wine. The carriage stopped before the main steps. The butler came forward, his expression oddly stiff. Edward dismissed it with a nod. "For you may rest, Henson. I shall not require you till morning." "Yes, my lord," the man murmured. Yet he did not move. Something about his hesitation pricked Edward's nerves. "Is my wife awake?" Henson's gaze flickered. "I believe not, my lord. The household has been unusually quiet." Edward frowned. "Unusually?" The butler lowered his eyes. "You will see, my lord." The Count strode inside, boots echoing in the vast hall. The air felt wrong, too still, too hollow. No servants bustling, no faint cry from the nursery. Even the fire in the hearth had burned down to embers. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time and opened the nursery door. The cradle was empty. For a long moment he simply stared. The small blanket was folded neatly upon the chair. The tiny cap his wife had sewn lay beside it. The candle flickered, its wax hardened into strange shapes. He turned sharply and went to their chamber. The bed was made. The wardrobe doors hung open, several gowns missing. On the writing desk lay a folded paper sealed with wax. He knew her hand at once. He broke the seal, his fingers unsteady. "Edward, I can no longer bear the humiliation. Each day your absence speaks louder than your words. I have endured the whispers, the pity, and the quiet knowledge that my love has become your burden. Forgive me, but I must leave before all that is good within me dies. Margaret." The ink wavered as if written in haste, the last letters blurred by tears. He dropped the page, his heart hammering. "Margaret!" His voice rang through the empty rooms. "Margaret!" No answer, only the echo of his own desperation. He ran down the stairs, calling for the housekeeper, the maids, anyone who had seen her. Mrs. Benton appeared at last, her face pale, her hands twisting in her apron. "My lord, she left before dawn. The nurse went with her. She said she would not trouble you for direction. A hired carriage was waiting at the gate." Edward seized her arm. "Where did she go?" "She gave no destination. Only that she wished to travel north, my lord. The coachman said he thought it was toward the post road to Whitby." He turned away, already calling for his horse. "Saddle Mercury at once. Tell the grooms to ready 2 mounts if one should fail." "My lord!" "Go!" The household scattered in confusion. Edward strode to his study, his thoughts spinning in wild circles. North, Whitby. Why there? Her mother's family was from Kent, far to the south. Had she gone to friends? Or simply fled? He pressed his hand to his forehead, sick with self-reproach. How many nights had she waited in silence, while he wasted himself in London's salons, in empty charm and colder embraces? When he stepped outside, the morning had turned to grey daylight. The air smelled of rain. His groom led out the black stallion, and Edward mounted swiftly. The butler came running, calling, "My lord, a messenger arrived." Edward reined in. "What messenger?" The man held up a small bundle wrapped in linen. "He said it was found upon the North Road near the old coaching inn. He thought you should have it." Edward opened the bundle. Inside lay a ribbon from his son's blanket, the blue one Margaret had embroidered with his initials. It was damp with dew, torn at one end. He stared at it for a heartbeat, then urged the horse forward. The road unrolled before him in long, mist-shrouded miles. Each village he passed seemed to whisper of her absence. At the first inn, he stopped to question the stable boys. Yes, a lady and infant had passed, travelling under another name. She had been calm, though her eyes looked tired. She had paid in gold and asked for privacy. He pressed on, stopping only to change horses. The northern wind grew sharper, the sky heavier. Guilt drove him harder than any whip. He saw again her face when she had first entered the house as his bride. So young, so certain of his love. What had he done with that trust? At dusk, he reached the old coaching inn mentioned by the messenger. Smoke curled from its chimney. A few travellers stood outside, watching him with curiosity as he dismounted. "Did a lady with a child pass this way?" he asked the innkeeper. The man nodded slowly. "Aye, 2 nights past. Called herself Mrs. Gray. Fine manners, paid well, took the east coach at sunrise." "Did she say where she was bound?" "Whitby, I think. Spoke of finding work or kin. Hard to tell. She looked determined." Edward leaned on the counter, breathing hard. "Was she alone?" The innkeeper hesitated. "There was another man, sir. Arrived later that day. Asked after the same lady. London gentleman by the look of him. He left after a short while, heading east too." "Did they speak?" "I cannot say, but he looked displeased when he left." A chill crept up Edward's spine. "What name did he give?" "None, sir, paid in sovereigns." Edward left the inn and stood by his horse, staring down the road vanishing into mist. Another man, seeking her. Could Lydia have sent someone to follow? The thought filled him with dread. His mistress had always known how to wound with elegance. Had she whispered rumours, spread poison? He rode until night fell. At a crossroads he stopped beside a small chapel. The door was unlocked, a single candle burning before the altar. He stepped inside and sank onto a bench. The silence pressed close. He bowed his head. "If there is mercy left for me," he whispered, "let her be safe. Punish me, not her." It was the first prayer he had spoken in years. When he rose, he felt neither absolution nor peace, only the weight of what must still be done. He stepped outside, ready to mount, when a figure appeared in the doorway. A young priest, scarcely older than a boy, held out a small parcel. "You are the Count of Ashford?" Edward hesitated. "I am." "This was left here at dawn by a traveller. She said it was for the man who would come seeking her, should God will it." Edward took the parcel with trembling hands. The priest bowed and withdrew. He unwrapped the paper carefully. Inside lay a tiny silver rattle, engraved with his son's initials, E.A., and tied with the same torn ribbon he had carried all day. The metal gleamed faintly in the candlelight. He closed his eyes. Margaret had been here. She had stood where he stood now, leaving behind this sign as though she knew he would follow. He turned toward the open door, the wind whispering through the trees. Somewhere ahead, beyond the fog and the endless miles, she was still moving farther from him. He mounted, clutching the rattle against his chest, and spurred his horse into the dark. A messenger galloped up the road, calling his name, holding a small ribbon from the baby's blanket, found at a remote coaching inn. The wind tore at his coat as Edward rode, the road ahead narrowing between fields of pale frost. The messenger's words still rang in his ears. The ribbon had been found near a small coaching inn 2 days north of the chapel. He had already ridden half the night, his eyes stinging, his thoughts tangled between guilt and fear. The silver rattle hung against his chest, tied by its ribbon to his coat. Each time it struck against him, it sounded like a child's cry. At dawn, he reached the inn. Smoke curled weakly from the chimney. The smell of burnt bread drifted through the yard. A stable boy looked up as Edward dismounted, startled by the fine coat, the horse, the wild eyes of the man who wore both. "You there," Edward called, tossing him the reins. "A lady came this way, a young woman with a baby. Did you see her?" The boy blinked, then nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, yesterday morning. Called herself Mrs. Gray. She was kind, sir. Bought me breakfast when I mucked the stalls. Said she was bound for the sea." Edward's voice broke through the chill air. "The sea? Did she say which town?" "Whitby, sir. Took the east coach." The boy rubbed his sleeve across his face. "There was another man asking after her, too. Fancy coat like yours. He didn't stay long." Edward stiffened. "What man?" The boy shrugged. "Said he was from London. Paid for the lady's direction, then galloped off the same way she went." He pressed a coin into the boy's hand and strode inside. The innkeeper recognized him at once, bowed, and poured coffee without being asked. Edward leaned forward, his tone low. "Tell me everything you know about the lady who stayed here." "She was quiet, my lord," the innkeeper said. "Tired, but proud. Travelled with a nurse, both under false names. The child was healthy. She asked for privacy but left her Bible on the table. Said she'd return for it, though I doubt she meant to." "Did she seem afraid?" "Not afraid, resolute, like someone escaping chains." Edward closed his hand around the cup, his knuckles white. "And the man who came after her?" The innkeeper's expression darkened. "He claimed to be her cousin. I did not believe it. He watched the road a long while, then rode off. I heard him tell his groom, 'She cannot run forever.'" Edward's jaw tightened. Lydia's name rose in his mind like a curse. He thanked the innkeeper, mounted again, and followed the east road toward Whitby. The mist had lifted, revealing long hills that curved down toward the sea. He rode without pause until the horse stumbled, foam at its mouth. He stopped at a small stable, traded for another mount, and pressed on. By mid-afternoon, he reached the outskirts of Whitby. The salt wind burned his throat. Fishing boats rocked against the grey water, and gulls circled over the harbour. He asked after a lady with a child, and at last an old woman mending nets pointed toward the upper town. "She came 3 days ago," the woman said. "Rented a room near the church, paid honest coin, spoke kindly. The baby laughed often, but she left sudden at dawn." "Did she say where she was going?" The woman shook her head. "Only that she needed peace. I reckon she found none here." Edward thanked her, climbed the narrow street and found the small lodging house. The landlady was wary but softened when he handed her a gold sovereign. "Yes," she said at last, "Mrs. Gray stayed here. A sweet lady, though her eyes told a story she'd never speak. She asked for the church bell to wake her each morning, said she liked its sound." He looked around the room she had left behind. It was plain, clean, empty, except for a chair by the window and a dried flower pressed between the Bible's pages. He turned it over in his hand, the petals brittle. "She was here," he murmured. "Aye," the landlady said, "but she's gone south now. Bought passage on a coach bound for York. Said she had a letter to deliver." Edward turned sharply. "A letter? To whom?" The landlady shrugged. "Didn't say. Only that it was the last thing she owed before she could rest." He thanked her and walked back into the street. The harbour fog had thickened again. He watched the coach road winding inland and felt the exhaustion rise behind his eyes. Every trace he found led to another. It was as if she wanted to be found and not found at the same time. He found a small tavern and sat before the hearth, turning the silver rattle over in his hands. When the innkeeper brought him bread and broth, Edward asked, "Have you heard of a London gentleman? Well-dressed, perhaps staying here these past days?" The innkeeper nodded. "Yes, sir. He came last evening, inquiring after a lady and child. Seemed most impatient. Left just after dawn, riding south again, said he'd found what he needed." Edward's pulse quickened. "Did he leave a name?" "No, sir. Only left a coin on the counter and a word I won't repeat before my wife." Edward stood abruptly. "Which road did he take?" "The York Road, sir." Outside, the wind whipped against the tavern sign. Edward mounted again, though every muscle in his body ached. The sun dipped low as he followed the same road the stranger had taken, the same Margaret had chosen. The countryside blurred past him, stone walls, bare fields, and the long shadow of his own guilt. At sunset, he reached another coaching stop. The inn's windows glowed warm through the dusk. Inside, travellers talked in low voices. A barmaid came to his table. "A room, my lord?" "Information," he said. "A woman with a child. She would have come through here." The barmaid smiled faintly. "Ah, yes, I remember her. Gentle, quiet, but firm. She mended the seam of her baby's blanket right there by the fire. Said she was bound for York to meet her husband." His breath caught. "She said that?" "Aye, though she did not look like a woman waiting for love, more like one preparing to test it." Edward's chest tightened. "And the man?" "There was one. Arrived not long after she left. He asked after her too, but when I told him she was gone, he cursed under his breath and rode off." He closed his eyes. The same man again. Lydia's spy, no doubt. What game had she begun? He finished his meal in silence, his thoughts dark. When the barmaid cleared the table, she looked at the rattle beside his plate. "A fine piece, my lord. Your child's?" "Yes," he said softly. "My son's." She nodded, then said, "Then ride fast, sir. The world's colder for a child without his father." He rode again at dawn. The clouds pressed low, the road muddy beneath the horses' hooves. He followed the route toward York, stopping only once to water the animal. By late morning, the great towers of the cathedral rose ahead. The city swarmed with carriages and traders. Edward questioned anyone who would speak to him, coachmen, grooms, market women, but no one had seen her. At last, near the inn by the minster, a washerwoman recalled a lady fitting the description. "She came to send a letter," the woman said, wringing her hands. "Paid me to deliver it to the London post. Her hand trembled so, I offered to write it for her, but she refused." "A letter," Edward murmured. "Did she say to whom?" The woman hesitated. "Only that it would reach a lady in London. Miss Harcourt, I think she said." The name struck him like a blow. Lydia. Margaret had written to Lydia. For what purpose? Plea, forgiveness, or warning? He turned on his heel, heart pounding. If Lydia had received such a letter, she would not stay silent. The woman loved intrigue too much. Margaret's life, her reputation, might already be at risk. Edward ordered a fresh horse and rode south. The days blurred together, fields, milestones, grey sky. He barely slept. When he stopped, it was only to change horses. His mind burned with images. Margaret writing by candlelight, Lydia smiling over a sealed envelope, the gossip that would follow if the contents were cruelly used. On the fourth day, he reached the outskirts of London. The air was heavy with smoke and winter rain. He went straight to Lydia Harcourt's townhouse in Mayfair. Servants whispered as he passed, eyes wide at his dishevelled appearance. Lydia received him in her drawing room, dressed in pale silk, a faint smile on her lips. "My dear Edward," she said sweetly, "you look half alive. Have you ridden from the ends of the earth?" He ignored the jest. "You received a letter from Lady Ashford." Her eyes flickered just once. "I receive many letters, Edward. This one came from York. You will give it to me." She tilted her head, the smile lingering. "Ah, so she writes now. How touching. I wonder, did she think I would betray her?" "Did you?" His voice hardened. Lydia laughed softly. "If I wished to, I could have done so long ago. No, Edward, I merely wished to remind her that hearts can change as swiftly as seasons. Even yours." He stepped closer. "If you have harmed her in any way—" Her gaze sharpened. "What will you do? Ruin me? You have already done so with your silence. She left you, not I." He turned away, pacing. "You know where she is." "Perhaps. But tell me, Edward, if she wished to be found, would she not have come to you herself?" He faced her again. "If you know her whereabouts, you will tell me now." Lydia's hand drifted toward a folded paper on the table. "I know only that she has purchased a cottage in Yorkshire under the name Mrs. Gray. She wrote to me once to ask that I return her ring. I did not reply. Perhaps I should have." He snatched the paper before she could move it. It was a bill of sale for a small property near Ripon. His heart leapt with hope. "This will do." She laughed, but it sounded brittle. "You'll find nothing there but your own shame." He left without another word. The street outside was darkening under rain. He rode north again that same night, the paper clutched in his glove. By dawn, he reached the cottage. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney. The door creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, dust lay thick upon the floor. A small chair stood overturned near the hearth. Upon it, a child's wooden toy, its wheel broken. He picked it up slowly, his throat tight. She had been here. She had lived, waited, perhaps hoped, and now she was gone again. A neighbor appeared at the threshold, an old woman with a shawl around her shoulders. "Looking for Mrs. Gray, are you?" she asked. "She left some weeks ago. Got a letter that made her pale as death, packed her things that very night." "What letter?" Edward demanded. "Didn't say, but I saw her cry before the fire. Then she told me she was heading south again, said she must work now for her child's sake." Edward swallowed hard. "Do you know where?" "She spoke of a vicarage in Oxfordshire, said she might serve there as a tutor. Kind lady, that one. Broke my heart to see her go." Edward turned back toward the door, clutching the child's toy in his hand. As he mounted his horse, a soft sound reached him from inside the cottage, the faint echo of a lullaby sung to a sleeping child. He froze, every muscle trembling. As he approached the vicarage, he heard a lullaby through an open window. The same lullaby Margaret once sang to their son. The sound drifted through the open window like a memory. Soft, steady, tender. Edward dismounted, his boots sinking into the damp earth. The vicarage stood modestly among the trees, its windows lit by a single golden glow. He moved closer, careful not to startle whoever sang inside. His chest tightened. That voice, he knew it. Every note carried the warmth of home. He edged nearer to the window and looked in. Margaret sat by the fire, her face half turned toward the cradle beside her. The child's small hand rested against her arm, the fingers curled. Her hair was unpinned, falling loosely over her shoulder. The nurse dozed in the corner. Margaret looked older, yes, but not broken. There was strength in the stillness of her profile. Edward pressed his hand against the wall to steady himself. He wanted to run inside, to fall at her feet, to say her name aloud, but he stood frozen, afraid that the sound of his voice would make her vanish like smoke. When the song ended, she rose, covered the child with a blanket, and turned toward the window. Her gaze lifted for an instant and met his. The moment stretched, soundless and bare. Margaret did not scream. She only drew the curtain closed. Edward exhaled as if struck, then walked to the front door and knocked. His knuckles trembled against the wood. Footsteps approached. The door opened to reveal a servant, young and uncertain. "Good evening," Edward said, his voice unsteady. "I wish to speak with Mrs. Gray." The servant frowned. "Mrs. Gray is resting, sir. May I tell her who calls?" He hesitated. "Tell her it is Edward Ashford." The servant's eyes widened. "My lord?" "Yes," he said quietly. "Please." The door shut. Edward waited, his heart pounding. The sound of footsteps returned, lighter now, hesitant. The door opened once more. Margaret stood before him. For a long moment neither spoke. She was pale, yet composed. Her eyes, once so gentle, now held caution. Her hands were clasped tightly before her. "Edward," she said at last, "why have you come?" He tried to speak, but the words caught. "Because I had to. Because every road led me here." Her voice remained calm. "You should not have followed me." "Margaret!" She lifted a hand to stop him. "I left for a reason. You know it." "Yes," he said, stepping closer. "I know it too well. I betrayed you, and I would give my life to undo it. But I could not bear not knowing where you were, if you were safe." Her gaze softened for an instant. "We are safe. I found the cottage, the ribbon, the rattle. Every step of your journey, I feared—" He broke off. "Did you not receive my letters?" She shook her head. "I asked not to. I could not bear your words then. Then let me speak them now." Her composure wavered. "What is there left to say?" "That I was a fool," he said, his voice low. "That I mistook comfort for love and pride for freedom. You were my home, Margaret, and I left it empty. I do not ask you to forgive me. I only ask you to believe that I see now what I destroyed." Tears shone in her eyes, though she blinked them away. "Do you know what it is to wake each day and wonder if your husband's heart lies elsewhere?" "Yes," he whispered, "for I have wondered if yours lies beyond my reach forever." She turned from him, her voice trembling. "You must go. The vicar and his family have given me kindness and work. If they knew who I was, it might bring trouble upon them." He stepped forward. "Then let me speak to them. Let me set it right." She looked back sharply. "You cannot set right what has already been done." He drew a breath. "At least allow me to see our son." Her expression softened. "He is sleeping. Then I will be quiet." She hesitated, then nodded once and led him inside. The small room was warm, smelling faintly of bread and wood smoke. The cradle stood near the hearth. The child's chest rose and fell in soft rhythm, his cheeks flushed with sleep. Edward knelt beside him. His voice shook. "He's grown," he murmured. "He looks like you." Margaret's lips curved faintly. "He has your eyes." He looked up at her. "Thank you for keeping him safe. I did what I must." He rose slowly. "Margaret, do you mean to stay here forever?" "I mean to live," she said simply, "and to raise him without bitterness. I have no wish to be your enemy. I never wanted that. Yet you made me one." Her tone held no anger, only truth. It struck him harder than any accusation. She turned toward the fire. "Miss Harcourt sent word to me once. She said you would tire of your remorse and come seeking pity. I told myself she was wrong. He froze. Lydia wrote to you? Yes. A cruel letter meant to wound. She said she knew your heart better than I did. She lies, he said fiercely. She always has. Margaret, if she still dares to reach you, I will put an end to it. Her voice steadied. There is no need for vengeance. I ask only that you leave us in peace. I cannot, he said, not while she holds any power to harm you. There are letters. She once threatened to use them against me. I will destroy them. Margaret sighed. You speak as if you can fight shadows. Lydia Harcourt has already taken everything that matters. He shook his head. No, she hasn't taken your forgiveness. And I will earn that, even if it takes the rest of my life. For the first time, her eyes softened. Forgiveness is not earned, Edward. It is given. But it cannot be forced. I understand. She looked at the sleeping child. Then go. I will not have him wake and see tears on my face. He bowed his head. May I come again? She hesitated. Perhaps. When my heart no longer trembles to hear your name. He wanted to speak again, to plead, to fall to his knees. But the dignity in her posture forbade it. He stepped back, whispered good night, and walked into the chill air. Outside, the stars glimmered faintly through the mist. He turned once to look at the window. The curtains stirred, as though she watched him go. He mounted his horse and rode through the night toward London, the echo of her words in his mind. Forgiveness is given, not earned. By dawn, he reached the city gates. The streets were half empty, the air heavy with fog. He rode straight to Lydia Harcourt's townhouse, his heart burning with anger and resolve. The servants let him in at once. Lydia appeared moments later, draped in a dressing gown, her smile sharp and practiced. My dear Edward, she said lightly, what an early hour for a visit. You wrote to my wife, he said coldly. Her smile did not fade. Indeed, I thought she deserved the truth. You thought to destroy her. I thought to show her what manner of man you are. Surely she suspected already. He stepped closer. You will give me every letter, every word you hold that bears my name. Lydia tilted her head. And if I refuse, then I will expose every deceit you have ever whispered in London. Every lie you sold for attention. Do not think I will hesitate. Her amusement flickered. So fierce, she said softly. But tell me, did she welcome you back with open arms? He said nothing. Ah, Lydia murmured. She did not. Poor Edward, you have lost her twice now. And you think destroying a few letters will mend it? He slammed his hand against the table. Where are they? She watched him for a long moment, then moved to a small escritoire. There, she said, opening a drawer. All your foolish confessions. I could have ruined you months ago had I wished. He gathered the letters and held them to the flame of the nearby candle. The paper curled, blackened, turned to ash. Lydia laughed softly. You are quite dramatic, my lord. I am finished with you, he said. You will not speak her name again. She smiled faintly, but something uncertain passed across her face. Do you truly believe she will forgive you? I will not rest until she does. He turned and left without another word. Behind him, Lydia watched the door close, her smile fading. She whispered to herself, he still loves her. Then she crossed the room, poured a glass of wine, and stared into the fire. That night, rain swept over London. In her townhouse, Lydia sat alone, her expression unreadable. On the table beside her lay a folded paper she had not burned, a bill of sale for a small Yorkshire cottage, signed by Monsieur Gray. At dawn, Edward reached the countryside once more. He followed the directions on the paper, his heart pounding with new hope. When he arrived at the cottage, the air was still. The door hung ajar. Inside, ashes lay cold in the hearth. Dust gathered on the cradle. He called her name softly, then louder. Only silence answered. He stepped farther in and saw a child's toy lying near the chair, a wooden horse with one wheel missing. A neighbor woman appeared at the door, her shawl drawn tight. You're too late, sir, she said kindly. Mrs. Gray left after receiving a letter. Looked pale as death, poor soul. Said she was going south. What letter? Edward asked quickly. Didn't say, but she wept before the fire, then packed her things. Said she meant to serve in a vicar's household, somewhere in Oxfordshire. He closed his eyes. Thank you. When the woman left, he knelt by the cradle and found a loose board beneath it. Inside lay a half-finished letter, his name written at the top. If ever you seek me, know that I am safe and that my heart will forgive you, but not yet. The words blurred before his eyes. He rose, clutching the letter, and walked out into the cold morning. He mounted his horse again, turning the reins southward. The road stretched before him, long and pale. His heart pounded with a new urgency. Somewhere ahead she waited, perhaps ready to forgive, perhaps not. But he would find her. As he reached the edge of the village, the faint melody of a lullaby carried on the wind. The same lullaby Margaret once sang to their son. Edward reined in his horse at the sound of the song. The notes drifted from the vicarage window, faint but unmistakable, like a thread pulling him toward his fate. The house stood quiet behind a row of budding trees, the scent of wet earth in the air. He dismounted, tied his horse to the gate, and approached the door. His pulse pounded with every step. He knocked. A woman answered, a young maid with kind eyes and a cautious voice. Yes, sir? I seek Mrs. Gray, he said. Tell her an old acquaintance has come. The maid hesitated, then nodded and disappeared inside. Edward waited, his hand pressed against the cold stone of the doorway. Through the window he saw the shadow of Margaret's figure appear in the hall. When the door opened again, she stood there, calm and pale, her expression unreadable. For a moment, neither spoke. He bowed slightly, as though greeting her at a formal dinner instead of on the threshold of heartbreak. Margaret, she inclined her head. My lord, do not call me that, he said softly. Not now. What else am I to call you? She asked. The name I once used belongs to another man. Then let me earn it again. Her eyes flickered, but her voice remained steady. You should not have come. I had to, he replied. Every road I took led me back to you. She stepped aside reluctantly. Then come in before the neighbors start whispering. The vicar dislikes gossip. The hall smelled faintly of ink and wood smoke. Margaret led him into a small parlor where the fire burned low. She motioned for him to sit, but he remained standing. You have followed me from one end of England to the other, she said. Why? Because I wronged you, he said, and because I cannot live with the thought that you hate me. She looked away, folding her hands. I do not hate you, Edward. I pitied you, that was worse. He flinched. Pity is for strangers. Then that is what you became, she said. He stepped closer, his voice urgent. Margaret, you must believe me. What passed between me and that woman, what I did, was a weakness, not a truth. I let vanity blind me. I thought I was master of my heart, but I was only a fool led by emptiness. You dishonored our vows, she said quietly, and our child will one day bear your name. Tell me, what should I say when he asks why his mother left her home? He could not answer. She turned her gaze toward the window, where the light of late afternoon filtered through thin curtains. I left because I could no longer live in your shadow. Every smile you gave me felt like an apology, and every silence reminded me that you belonged elsewhere. He took a deep breath. Then let me belong here again. If there is a way to repair what I broke, I will find it. Her expression softened just a little. You think everything can be repaired, Edward. Some things are only endured. He fell silent. From the next room came the faint rustle of the child stirring. Margaret rose and went to the door, returning a moment later with their son in her arms. The boy blinked sleepily, clutching a small wooden horse. Edward stared, his throat tight. He's grown. Margaret brushed a hand through the child's hair. He asks for his father sometimes. I tell him his father is traveling. Traveling, Edward repeated bitterly. Yes, wandering in circles, searching for forgiveness. She looked at him over the child's head. Forgiveness must begin with truth. Do you still see her? No, he said. Not since the night I left her house. She means nothing to me now. And yet, Margaret said, she writes to me. He started. She dares? Yes. Her words are full of poison. She said you pitied me, that you stayed married only because scandal would cost you more than my love ever did. His hands clenched. She lies. Margaret's tone remained calm. I believe she does. Still, her letter made me see that I must live by my own strength, not by the mercy of a man who once betrayed me. Then let me prove that mercy has turned to devotion, he said. I will return to London, confront her, destroy every letter, every rumour. You will never hear her name again. Margaret shook her head. Do not fight shadows. The more you struggle, the darker they become. Then tell me what I must do, he said. Leave me in peace. He looked at her, pain in his eyes. You do not mean that. I mean it because I must, she said softly. If I forgive too soon, I will lose myself again. He bowed his head. Then I will wait, even if it takes years. She said nothing. The child had fallen asleep again, his small hand resting against her shoulder. She kissed the top of his head, then looked back at Edward. You should go before the vicar returns. He does not approve of visitors at dusk. May I come again? He asked. She hesitated. When the anger in me fades enough to hear you without pain. He nodded. Then I will come when that time arrives. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. Edward. He looked back. Be careful, she said quietly. She will not forgive your defiance. I do not fear her, he replied. But I will end this once and for all. He stepped out into the cool air. The door closed behind him. The road stretched ahead like a challenge. That night, under the pale moon, he rode toward London. By the time he reached the city, the fog had thickened. Gas lamps flickered along the streets, casting yellow halos through the mist. He rode directly to Lydia Harcourt's townhouse, ignoring the startled servants who tried to announce him. Lydia was in her drawing room, dressed in silver silk, reclining on a chaise with a book open in her lap. When she saw him, she smiled as if she had been expecting him. Edward, she said lightly, you return to me as if summoned by regret. He shut the door behind him. You have written to my wife. She raised an eyebrow. Your wife? I thought she had abandoned you. You know where she is, he said, stepping closer. And you will tell me. Lydia laughed softly. How amusing. You think I keep track of the women you drive away? Enough of this, he snapped. You poisoned her peace with your lies. Why? Because I could, she said simply. Because it pleases me to see pride humbled. He stared at her, astonished by the cruelty behind the calm. You have no heart. On the contrary, she said, standing, I have one, and you once enjoyed its devotion. You tired of it, as you will tire of her forgiveness. I will never tire of her, he said. You were a mistake born of vanity. Margaret is my truth. Lydia's composure faltered for an instant, then hardened. And yet, you come to me, chasing after her ghost. He ignored the taunt. You know where she went after leaving the vicarage. Lydia's lips curved. Why should I help you? Perhaps I prefer her far away, where she can't tempt you to virtue. He caught sight of a folded paper on her desk, a bill of sale bearing the name M. Gray. He seized it. What is this? Nothing of importance, she said quickly. It is her handwriting, he said. You do know where she went. He turned for the door, but Lydia's voice stopped him. Edward, she said softly, she will never love you as she once did. You will chase her until you break yourself. Then let me break, he said without turning. Better that than live half a man. He left the house without another word. Behind him, Lydia stood motionless, the candlelight flickering over her pale face. When the door closed, she whispered to the empty room, He still loves her. Edward rode through the night once more, the paper clenched in his hand. The address led him to a small cottage near the moors, hidden by a grove of trees. When he reached it at dawn, he found silence. The door was unlatched, the windows shuttered. Inside, dust covered the floor, a cold hearth. A single chair overturned near the wall. He picked up a small toy beside it, a wooden horse, its wheel broken. A voice startled him. You're looking for Mrs. Gray? He turned. A neighbor woman stood in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl. Yes, he said. Where is she? Gone, sir. Left weeks ago. Got a letter that made her pale as death. She packed that very night. Said she was bound south to work for a clergyman's family. Edward's breath caught. Did she say from whom the letter came? No, sir. Only that it spoke of London. He thanked her, pressing a coin into her hand. When she left, he stood alone in the quiet room. The ashes in the hearth were cold, but in the cradle's drawer he found a folded note. It bore his name. If ever you seek me, know that I am safe, and that my heart will forgive you, but not yet. The handwriting blurred as he read. He pressed the letter to his chest, then turned toward the open door. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faintest trace of a melody. It was the lullaby Margaret used to sing to their son, soft, haunting, and near enough to make him believe she was still listening. He mounted his horse, eyes fixed on the southern road. Somewhere ahead, she waited, closer than before, yet still beyond his reach. That night, as he rode through the deepening dusk, a servant intercepted him on the road, breathless from haste. "My lord," the man cried, "Miss Harcourt, she's dead!" Found lifeless in her chair, a sealed envelope in her hand. The word struck Edward like a physical blow. He reined in his horse so sharply that it reared, throwing up a spray of mud. The servant stumbled back, panting, his cloak soaked from rain. "What did you say?" Edward demanded. "Miss Harcourt, my lord. She was found dead in her house this morning. The physician says her heart failed her. There was no sign of struggle, but she was holding an envelope, sealed and addressed to Lady Ashford." Edward stared at him in disbelief. "To my wife?" "Yes, my lord. The coroner's men took note of it. The servant said she'd been writing late into the night, then rang for no one after. She was found just before dawn." Edward turned his horse sharply toward London. "You will follow me tomorrow with the carriage. I'll ride ahead." He galloped through the storm, the night wind stinging his face, the rain slippery in his hands. Lydia dead, so suddenly, and a letter for Margaret in her grasp. Was it confession or vengeance? Whatever it contained, it could not reach Margaret before he did. By the time he reached the city, dawn had begun to lighten the rooftops. He went straight to Lydia's townhouse. The front door stood open, a constable posted outside. Edward dismounted and strode up the steps. "Lord Ashford," the constable said gravely, recognizing him. "Sad business, this." She passed quiet, by all accounts. The maid said she heard nothing till morning. "Where is the letter?" Edward asked. "In her study, sir. The coroner sealed the rest of her papers, but this one was addressed in full to Lady Ashford. Perhaps you should see it." Edward entered the dim study. Lydia sat in the chair by the fire, her body covered now by a dark cloth. The room smelled of candle smoke and roses. Upon the desk lay the envelope, the wax unbroken. His hands shook as he lifted it. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, elegant, sweeping, and sharp. He tore it open and read, "My dearest Lady Ashford, I am not your enemy, though you may think me one. I never wished to ruin you, only to remind you that we are alike in our suffering. You think yourself wronged by your husband's betrayal, but believe me, no woman is free from that pain. Edward loved you once, but he is proud and vain. When he tires of remorse, he will return to me, or to another. That is the way of men like him. Forgive me, for I have done you harm in anger. I sent you words meant to wound, and they did. But now I am tired of cruelty. Take this letter as my confession, and may it restore you to the peace I destroyed. There was never any plot against you beyond my jealousy. The letter you received, the one that drove you from your home, was my hand, not his. I forged it. Tell him this if you wish, or burn it and let the dead keep their secrets. My own peace has gone beyond reclaiming. Lydia Harcourt." Edward read the words twice, scarcely breathing. So it was she who had written the false letter, the lie that tore his marriage apart. His knees weakened and he sat down heavily, staring at the dying embers in the grate. The bitterness that had once burned in him melted into grief. Lydia had been his sin, and now she had paid for it with her life. He folded the letter and slipped it into his coat. "She deserves a Christian burial," he said quietly. "I will see to it myself." The constable nodded solemnly. A sad end for a beautiful lady. Edward left the house as the rain began to fall again. He arranged her burial without ceremony, paying the undertaker in silence. When the coffin was lowered into the ground the next day, he stood alone beside it. No mourners came. Only a white rose lay upon the wet earth, his farewell to a woman who had once called herself his salvation and had become his ruin. Afterward, he mounted his horse once more and turned toward Oxfordshire. The wind seemed lighter now, though his heart felt hollow. Margaret had to know the truth, but how could he bring her Lydia's last letter without reopening every wound? He reached the vicarage by dusk. The garden was quiet, the windows bright with lamplight. He saw Margaret through the glass, reading by the fire while the nurse played with the child on the floor. For a moment he hesitated, unsure whether he had the right to disturb her peace again. Then he gathered his courage and knocked. The same maid answered. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "My lord, Mrs. Grey, Lady Ashford is in the parlour." Margaret looked up when he entered, her face unreadable. "You return quickly," she said. He bowed slightly. "There has been a death." Her brow furrowed. "Whose?" "Miss Harcourt." She rose slowly, her expression composed but pale. "How?" Her heart failed her. "I was at her house this morning." Margaret's lips parted in surprise. "Why would you go there again?" "To end what she began," he said. "And to recover this." He held out the letter. She took it hesitantly. "To me?" "Yes." It was found in her hand. Margaret broke the seal and read. As her eyes moved across the page, her breath quickened. When she reached the end, her hand dropped to her side. "She admits it," she whispered. "She wrote the letter, the one that drove me away." "Yes," he said softly. "She confessed it in her last hour." Margaret sank into the chair, the paper trembling in her hand. "All this time I believed you meant to cast me aside, that you had written those words yourself. Do you know what it is to live with that thought?" He knelt beside her. "I know now, and I would give anything to erase it." Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not look at him. "She hated me, and I hated her in return, but I would not have wished her death." "Nor I," he said quietly. "She was lost before she ever wronged us. Let her rest." Margaret was silent for a long moment. Then she whispered, "I cannot understand how jealousy can drive one to such cruelty." He looked at her, his voice low. "Jealousy was born of what I gave her, the illusion of love. I do not deny my guilt, but her death must not be in vain. Let it end this chain of misery between us." She turned toward him at last. "You speak of endings, Edward, but I am weary of endings. I long for something that can begin again." "Then let this be that beginning," he said. "Not for the sake of our title or our estate, but for our son, for the truth we both lost sight of." Her tears fell freely now, but her voice was steady. "You still do not understand. Forgiveness is not a promise to forget. It is a decision to live despite remembering." He bowed his head. "Then let me live in that truth with you." She did not answer. Instead, she rose and crossed the room to the cradle, where the child slept. She stood for a long time watching him. Then, without looking back, she said, "You may stay until morning. He will know your face when he wakes." Edward's voice broke. "Thank you." The night passed quietly. Margaret said little, but her silence was not cold. It was heavy with thought, as if her heart were testing each memory of him against the letter in her hand. Edward sat by the hearth, unable to sleep, listening to the slow rhythm of his son's breathing. At dawn, he saddled his horse again. Margaret met him at the door, her face calm in the pale light. "Where will you go now?" she asked. "Home," he said simply, "to set our affairs in order. If you choose to return, the house will wait for you. If not, I will not force you." She nodded slowly. "I do not yet know what I will choose." "Then I will wait for your answer." She held the letter to her chest. "Do you believe in redemption, Edward?" "I believe in you," he said. A faint smile touched her lips. "Then perhaps there is hope." He bowed, mounted and rode away without looking back. Days passed before she decided to follow him. The vicar's wife helped her pack, the nurse carried the child, and by the end of the week, Margaret was on the road to London. Her heart beat faster with every mile. The pain of betrayal no longer burned. It ached like a wound beginning to heal. When she arrived at Ashford Manor, the gates stood open. The air smelled of rain and new blossoms. She entered the great hall and paused. The house was quiet, yet not empty. Edward's voice came softly from the drawing-room. "Margaret." She turned. He stood there, weary but peaceful, holding a folded paper, the letter she had once left on his desk the night she fled. "I have read your words 1,000 times," he said, "and each time I saw the woman I wronged and the strength I did not deserve." Her eyes glistened. "And what do you see now?" "A chance to begin again." She looked at him, uncertain, yet drawn forward by the gentleness in his tone. "You think love can rise from ashes?" "I think it already has." He reached for her hand, and for the first time in many months, she did not pull away. The warmth of his touch trembled between them. From outside came the sound of hooves, a messenger riding hard up the drive. The steward appeared in the doorway, his face grave. My lord, there is urgent news from London. The council demands your presence. A scandal has broken over Miss Harcourt's death. They say you are implicated. Edward's fingers tightened around the edge of the letter still in his hand. The steward's words echoed through the quiet hall like thunder. A scandal. His name entangled in Lydia's death. For a long moment he said nothing. The colour drained from his face, yet his voice remained calm. "Tell them I will come at once," he said. Margaret stepped forward. "Edward, what are they saying?" "That I had a hand in it, no doubt," he answered, his tone clipped. "Her death was sudden, her reputation notorious, and my name too close to hers for comfort. London will always choose the worst story." Her expression filled with alarm. "You cannot go alone. You must not." "I must," he said. "If I delay, they will think me guilty." Margaret took his arm. "Then at least let me come with you." He shook his head. "No, your return to London now would only fan the flames. Stay here, protect our son. I will send word as soon as I can." She hesitated, torn between fear and trust. "You promised no more secrets, Edward." He looked into her eyes, the sincerity raw in his voice. "And I keep that promise. There will be none. Whatever the council says, I will tell you all." The steward coughed softly. "The carriage is ready, my lord." Edward nodded. "Thank you, Benton." He turned back to Margaret, pressing her hand briefly. "Whatever happens, believe that I will not yield until the truth is known." Her eyes glistened. "I believe you," she whispered. He kissed her hand, then released it, striding out into the grey afternoon. The carriage wheels splashed through puddles as it rolled away down the drive. Margaret stood at the door until it vanished beyond the trees. The journey to London took a day and a half through endless rain. When Edward arrived, the city felt colder than he remembered. Rumour already hung over the streets like smoke. Servants whispered as he passed. Old acquaintances turned away. By evening, he stood before the dark doors of the council chamber, his coat heavy with travel dust. Inside, a half-circle of solemn faces awaited him, men of power, grey-haired and grave. Lord Greville, the eldest among them, spoke first. "Lord Ashford, you know why you have been summoned." "I do," Edward said. "You were the last to see Miss Harcourt alive," Greville continued. "The coroner's report suggests she died within hours of your visit. The servants say voices were raised. They claim she appeared distressed after you left." Edward met their eyes steadily. "We spoke, yes. There were harsh words. I went to reclaim letters that should never have been written. I left her alive and unharmed. She died by her own hand, or her own illness. I cannot say which." Lord Greville studied him. "There is no evidence of violence. Still, her death has stirred talk in every parlour from Mayfair to Westminster. Some say you quarrelled over your wife's disappearance." Edward's voice sharpened. "Those who spread such tales know nothing of honour. Lady Ashford left me because of Miss Harcourt's deceit, a deceit Miss Harcourt confessed in writing before her death. I have that letter." He took the folded paper from his coat and placed it on the table. The council members bent over it, reading in silence. At last Lord Greville sighed. "This letter clears you of cruelty, perhaps, but not of indiscretion. A nobleman's sins weigh heavily when they stir public shame. You have endangered the dignity of your title." Edward's shoulders straightened. "Then strip me of it if you must. I care only that my wife's name is freed from scandal." A murmur ran through the chamber. Greville leaned back, regarding him with reluctant respect. "You speak boldly, my lord. Few men would surrender honour for truth." "I lost my honour long before this," Edward said quietly. "Now I seek only peace." The elder nodded slowly. "The council will deliberate. For now you may go, but you will remain in London until we reach a conclusion." Edward bowed and left. Outside, the fog rolled thick through the streets. He walked aimlessly until he reached the edge of Hyde Park, where lamps glowed faintly through the mist. He thought of Margaret waiting at Ashford Manor, wondering if she regretted her faith in him. He could not bear that thought. At a small inn nearby, he rented a room. He spent the night writing, letters to his solicitor, to the steward, to Margaret. In the last, he wrote only one line: "Whatever they decide, my heart remains yours." The next morning brought no peace. The papers carried hints of the scandal. Nothing explicit, but enough to make his name the talk of London. He kept to his rooms, venturing out only to speak with his solicitor. By the third day, a messenger arrived from Ashford Manor. Margaret's hand was on the letter. "Edward, do not face this storm alone. I am leaving for London with our son. Whatever they say of you, they must look upon me and know the truth of the man I married. If they would judge, let them judge us both." Margaret. He read the words twice, his heart torn between fear and gratitude. He wanted her near him, yet dreaded the cruelty of the gossip she would face. When she arrived 2 days later, he met her at the inn door. She wore a plain travelling cloak, her face pale from the journey, but resolute. Their child slept in the nurse's arms behind her. "Margaret," he said softly, "you should not have come." "I could not remain behind while you suffered alone," she replied. "I will not hide any longer. They may speak as they please." He took her hands. "Your courage shames me." "It should inspire you instead," she said. "You once fought for pride, now fight for truth." That evening, word came from Lord Greville, summoning him again. Margaret insisted on accompanying him. The council hall was crowded now with curious eyes. Lords, ladies, servants, all whispering. Margaret's entrance silenced them. She stood tall beside Edward, her chin lifted, her composure flawless. Lord Greville looked from one to the other. "Lady Ashford, you stand by your husband?" "I do," she said firmly, "because he speaks the truth. I fled our home believing lies written by Miss Harcourt. Her final confession proves it. If you condemn my husband, you condemn me as well." A murmur rippled through the room. Edward glanced at her, gratitude in his eyes. Lord Greville cleared his throat. "No one condemns you, my lady, but the council must protect the honour of our class." Margaret's voice rose clear and steady. "Then do so by upholding justice, not by feeding rumour. The Count of Ashford may have erred as a man, but he has acted with honour since. If a noble title is worth anything, it must rest on truth." The silence that followed was profound. Greville's expression softened. "You speak with courage, my lady. We shall take your words to heart." Edward bowed. "That is all I ask." When they left the chamber, Margaret's composure finally broke. She leaned against him, her breath unsteady. "Do you think they will believe us?" "They must," he said, "and if they do not, we shall live without them." They returned to the inn and sat together by the fire. The child stirred in his cradle, half awake. For the first time in months, Margaret smiled. "Do you remember," she said, "how he laughed when you first held him? I thought then that nothing could come between us." "Nor shall again," Edward replied. "If we must start anew, we will." She rested her hand on his. "Then let us begin with truth. Tell me everything, Edward, even what I do not wish to hear." He hesitated, then spoke. He told her of the night he first met Lydia, of the vanity that led him astray, of the guilt that grew when he realized what he had lost. She listened without interruption, her face pale but calm. When he finished, she said quietly, "You have carried this burden alone too long. But confession is not punishment, it is release." He looked at her in wonder. "You forgive me?" "I am learning to," she said. "Each word you speak makes it easier." They sat in silence after that, the fire crackling between them. For the first time, the air felt free of ghosts. The next morning, a knock sounded at the door. The steward entered, his face alight with relief. "My lord, my lady, the council has spoken. You are cleared of all suspicion. They have declared Miss Harcourt's death a misfortune, and the case closed." Edward exhaled slowly. Margaret gripped his hand. "Then it is over," she whispered. He turned to her. "Not over, renewed." That evening they walked together through the quiet streets. The rain had stopped and the lamps shone like gold through the mist. Margaret paused beside the river. "The city no longer frightens me," she said softly. "Perhaps because I have faced worse within my own heart." Edward looked at her. "Will you come home, Margaret?" She met his gaze. "Home is not a place, Edward. It is peace. If we have found that, then yes." He reached for her hand. "Then let us go home." They returned to the manor within the week. The staff greeted them with cautious smiles. The house, once shadowed by silence, seemed alive again. That evening, as they walked through the gardens, their son toddling between them, Margaret stopped beside the old stone bench where they had once quarrelled long ago. "Do you remember," she said, "the last words I spoke before I left? I told you I could no longer bear the humiliation. I remember every syllable. And now?" she asked. He looked at her gently. Now I see that humility was what I needed most. She smiled, tears bright in her eyes. Then perhaps we have both learned something worth keeping. The air was cool, the first hint of spring threading through it. Somewhere beyond the trees a lark began to sing. Margaret took a deep breath, her face turned toward the house, glowing in the twilight. "It feels as though the world has given us one more chance," she murmured. Edward squeezed her hand. "Then let us not waste it." She leaned her head against his shoulder. The light from the house flickered over them, soft and golden. As the evening deepened, a rider appeared at the far gate carrying a sealed document marked with the Ashford crest, the final decree of the council. The rider dismounted quickly, bowing as he handed Edward the sealed document. "From the council, my lord. Urgent delivery." Edward broke the wax and read. His eyes moved over the lines once, then again, slower. Margaret watched his expression shift from calm to something she could not name. "What is it?" she asked softly. He folded the paper carefully. "The final decree, my name is cleared. The case is closed." "Then why do you look troubled?" He hesitated. "Because the council requires my presence in London one last time, to sign an official statement and to pledge a portion of my inheritance to a charitable fund. It is meant as restitution for the scandal." Margaret frowned. "Restitution? But you were not guilty." "No, yet they expect contrition, a public gesture of remorse." "Then give it," she said firmly. "It will cost you nothing of worth." He nodded slowly. "You are right. Still, I cannot help but feel they wish to make an example of me." "Let them," she replied. "So long as truth is known, what matter the rest?" He smiled faintly. "You sound stronger than I remember." "Perhaps I am," she said, turning toward the garden path. "Suffering teaches endurance." He reached for her hand. "And forgiveness teaches grace." She looked at him, her eyes gentle. "Then we are learning together." That night they dined quietly, the air between them lighter than it had been in months. Their son babbled from his chair and Margaret laughed, softly but with real warmth. Edward watched her, wondering how he had ever risked losing the sound of that laughter. 2 mornings later, he set out for London again. The journey was calm this time, the air crisp with early spring. He rode without dread, carrying a sense of closure rather than guilt. When he reached the city, the council clerk greeted him politely and led him to a small chamber lined with books. "Lord Ashford," the man said, bowing, "we have prepared the documents. A brief statement of exoneration will be printed for the record, and your contribution to the charitable fund will be acknowledged. Once you sign, your name will be formally restored." Edward glanced at the papers. "Then it is truly over?" "Yes, my lord. There remains only the signature." He took the pen and signed. When he rose to leave, Lord Greville entered unexpectedly. "Ah, Ashford," he said, extending his hand. "You have borne yourself with dignity throughout. The council respects that. There are few who could face such public disgrace and emerge with honor." Edward bowed slightly. "I thank you, my lord." Greville's expression softened. "Return to your estate, Ashford. Make it what it once was and cherish your wife. The world seldom grants second chances." "I intend to do both," Edward said. When he left the chamber, the bells of St. Paul's rang through the mist. For the first time in years he felt light. The burden that had chained him seemed to dissolve with every peal. He turned his horse toward the north road, eager to reach home before nightfall. By dusk, he was nearing the outskirts of Yorkshire. The clouds had turned gold with the last of the sun, and the air smelled of rain. He urged his horse faster. As he reached the final bend toward Ashford Manor, he saw the glow of lanterns ahead. 2 carriages waited by the gate, their lamps casting moving shadows. He slowed, puzzled. When he entered the courtyard, Margaret met him at the steps, a shawl drawn around her shoulders. Her eyes were bright, not with fear, but relief. "You have returned sooner than I dared hope," she said. "I rode without rest," he answered, dismounting. "What is all this?" She smiled faintly. "Visitors. The vicar and his wife came to call. They brought letters from Oxfordshire. Apparently word of your name's restoration has reached even the smallest parish." "That was fast," he said with a small laugh. "London rarely sends good news quickly. They wished to see for themselves that Lady Ashford was not a ghost invented by rumour," she said teasingly. "And were they satisfied?" "They were charmed," she said. "The vicar's wife nearly wept when she saw the child." She said forgiveness had made me lovelier than before. I told her forgiveness had made me wiser. He looked at her fondly. And is that true? She tilted her head. Perhaps both. They walked inside together. The fire glowed warmly in the drawing room, the scent of baked bread drifting from the kitchen. For a while they said little. Words were no longer needed. Later that evening, when the house had grown quiet, Edward sat by the hearth reading letters of estate business. Margaret joined him, her embroidery in hand. The silence between them was peaceful. At last she spoke. "Edward, do you ever wonder why she wrote that last letter? To me, not to you." He set the papers aside. "Perhaps she meant to be forgiven by the one she wronged most." Margaret nodded slowly. "I used to despise her. Now I think of her as a warning, a woman who let pride consume what little love she had left." He reached for her hand. "Then let us be her opposite." She smiled faintly. "That, Edward, depends on you." He understood. "It will not fail again." The following days passed quietly. The scandal faded from conversation, replaced by new gossip in London. Ashford Manor began to fill again with life. Edward oversaw the tenants' improvements. Margaret reopened the parish school she had once abandoned. Together they began to build something steady. One afternoon, Margaret received a letter bearing a foreign seal. She read it twice, her brow furrowing. When Edward entered, she looked up quickly. "It is from your aunt in Florence," she said. "She invites us to visit for the summer. She writes that a change of air would restore us both." He smiled. "Do you wish to go?" "I am not sure," she admitted. "The thought of travel feels strange after so much confinement. Yet perhaps it would do us good." "Then we shall go," he said simply. "If peace can be found beneath Italian skies, we will find it there." Her lips curved. "Always decisive now." He chuckled softly. "You once accused me of hesitation. I dare not risk it again." They planned the journey together, light-hearted for the first time in years. But before they could depart, another visitor arrived, Lord Greville himself, accompanied by a clerk. "My lord," Edward said, surprised. "This is an honor." Greville smiled. "Not an inspection, I assure you. I came to deliver this personally." He handed over a smaller document, sealed in red wax. "Your official exoneration, now entered into record. It also restores to you certain privileges that had been suspended during inquiry." Edward accepted it with gratitude. "You have shown me great fairness, my lord." Greville inclined his head. "Fairness was owed. And Lady Ashford, you have shown the kind of constancy that humbles men like myself. You remind us that mercy has a place even among the titled." Margaret lowered her gaze modestly. "We are all human, my lord. Titles do not shield hearts." Greville smiled. "Indeed. I will take my leave, content that this house is again a home." When the carriages rolled away, Margaret turned to Edward with a thoughtful expression. "Strange, is it not? How easily forgiveness can restore what power could not." He nodded. "Strange and beautiful." That night, after the household slept, Edward walked alone through the garden. The moon lay bright across the lawns. He thought of all that had happened, the ruin, the search, the repentance, and how every sorrow had led him here. He returned to the house to find Margaret awake by the window, their son asleep in her arms. "You should rest," he said softly. She smiled. "I was waiting for you." He sat beside her, watching the child's steady breathing. "Do you ever think," he murmured, "that we were meant to lose each other in order to find one another again?" She looked at him, her eyes tender. "Perhaps love needs distance to learn its depth." He touched her cheek. "Then may we never forget the distance we crossed." They sat in silence, the child's soft breathing filling the space between them. Outside, dawn began to brighten the horizon. Days turned to weeks. The manor thrived again. Laughter returned to its halls. Edward kept his promise to cherish, not to command. Margaret's strength grew with each passing day, and so did their quiet companionship. Then, one morning, as they prepared for their journey to Italy, the steward entered with a folded letter bearing an unfamiliar hand. He hesitated before handing it to Edward. "It came by special courier, my lord. No seal of origin." Edward frowned and opened it. The writing was elegant but unfamiliar. The message was brief. "To the Count of Ashford, do not be too certain that your past has died with Miss Harcourt. Some debts outlive their debtor. A friend. Margaret saw his face pale. "What is it?" she asked. He handed her the paper without a word. She read it, her expression tightening. "Is this a threat?" "I do not know," he said slowly, "but someone knows more than they should." Outside, the wind rose suddenly, rattling the window panes. From the far end of the corridor, the nurse appeared carrying the child, her face troubled. "My lady," she said, "a messenger waits at the gate. He claims to bear news concerning Miss Harcourt's estate." Edward stood abruptly, the paper still clutched in his hand. The wind outside howled against the windows, as though echoing the unease that filled the room. Margaret rose as well, her face composed but pale. "Show him in," Edward told the steward. Moments later, the messenger entered, a tall, thin man in a travel-stained coat. His eyes darted nervously from one corner of the room to the other before settling on Edward. "You bring news concerning Miss Harcourt's estate?" Edward asked. "Yes, my lord," the man said. His voice trembled slightly. Whether from exhaustion or fear, Edward could not tell. "I was sent by her solicitor, Mr. Fellows of Chancery Lane. He begs your attendance in London once more. Certain papers have been discovered among the late Miss Harcourt's possessions, papers that concern your family directly." Margaret glanced at Edward. "What kind of papers?" The man hesitated. "Letters, my lady. Not between yourself and Miss Harcourt, but between her and another party. They suggest that Miss Harcourt acted not alone in her schemes against the Ashford name." Edward's eyes narrowed. "Another party? Who?" "I cannot say, my lord. Mr. Fellows insists he must speak with you in person. He described the matter as delicate." Margaret stepped forward. "Delicate how?" The messenger lowered his gaze. "He would not say more, only that the discovery alters the understanding of Miss Harcourt's death." Edward's voice was low but firm. "Tell Mr. Fellows I will come to him tomorrow." The man bowed quickly, relief flooding his face. "Thank you, my lord. I shall return with your reply." When he was gone, the silence in the room felt heavy. Margaret turned to Edward. "You cannot go alone this time. I will not remain here while some new intrigue unfolds in London. I fear it may be nothing more than idle gossip dressed in legal formality," he said. "Or it may be something far worse," she replied. "If there are still secrets hidden in Lydia's affairs, they must be faced together." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Together, then." They set out the next morning. The road to London stretched grey and damp beneath a restless sky. Margaret sat beside him in the carriage, her hands folded in her lap. Neither spoke much, but their silence was one of strength, not distance. When they arrived in the city that evening, Mr. Fellows received them at his office, a narrow building filled with papers and the smell of ink. The solicitor rose hastily as they entered. "My lord, my lady, I am deeply honoured by your presence. Pray, forgive the urgency of my summons." "Your messenger spoke of letters," Edward said without ceremony. "Show them to me." Fellows inclined his head and went to a cabinet. "Indeed, my lord, after Miss Harcourt's death, certain effects were stored in trust pending resolution of her debts. Among them we have found correspondence between her and a man signing himself only as R. The tone of these letters is unsettling." He laid several sheets upon the desk. The handwriting was Lydia's, unmistakably graceful, yet sharp. Edward picked one up and read aloud. "You promised me she would suffer, and she has. The forged letter was delivered as you advised, and he believes it came from his own household. Yet I grow weary of deceit. When all this ends, what will become of me?" Margaret's breath caught. She was not alone, she whispered. Edward turned the page. Another letter, written in the same hand but darker in tone. "If you betray me, I will not fall alone. The Count will learn whose counsel guided me. Remember, your name is not beyond reproach." He looked up at the solicitor. "Who is this R?" Fellows adjusted his spectacles nervously. "We do not know, my lord. The letters were unsigned save for that initial. But there is one more, written in a different hand." He handed Edward a final sheet. The script was rough, hurried, the ink smeared. "Miss Harcourt, you promised silence. Do not speak of me again. If the Ashfords learn the truth, they will destroy us both. The arrangement was never meant to harm the child. Burn this and forget my name." Margaret's voice trembled. The child. Edward's jaw tightened. Then whoever this was, they feared exposure not for my sake, but for my son's. Fellows nodded uneasily. That was my reading as well, my lord. I have no wish to alarm you, but it appears Miss Harcourt was acting under influence. Perhaps blackmail. Edward stared at the letters in silence, then asked, "Do you have any suspicion of who this might be?" The solicitor hesitated. "Only a faint one. Miss Harcourt's accounts show regular payments to a certain Mr. Rowan Merton, an agent of trade who once served in your late father's employ. The name begins with R." Edward's hand closed around the letter. "Rowan Merton. He handled my father's shipping business before I inherited the title. He disappeared years ago under suspicion of fraud." Margaret whispered. "Then he was the one guiding her." "Perhaps more than guiding," Edward said grimly. "If he forged the letter that drove you from me, he did it to destroy our family entirely. He would profit from our ruin. He always sought revenge for his dismissal." Fellows nodded gravely. "Shall I contact the authorities, my lord?" "Not yet," Edward said. "If he still lives, he will hear of these letters soon enough and try to silence us. Better we find him first." Margaret looked at him anxiously. "Edward, promise me you will not go chasing this man as if vengeance could heal what's past." "It is not vengeance," he said. "It is the only way to end it. I will not rest until the truth is known." That night they stayed at a small inn on the edge of the city. Margaret could not sleep. She rose and crossed to the window, watching the fog drift through the streets below. Edward stirred and sat up. "You cannot rest either," she murmured. "No," he said. "My mind keeps turning to that name, Merton. If he truly was behind it, then Lydia's death may not have been her own doing. She wrote of weariness, not despair. Someone could have silenced her before she spoke." Margaret turned toward him. "Then you think he killed her?" "I think he used her and discarded her when she became dangerous." She shivered. "Then we must be cautious. A man who hides behind letters is capable of anything." He rose and took her hand. "I will protect you, Margaret. You and our son." Her voice softened. "Protecting is not the same as shutting me out. Let me stand beside you this time." He kissed her forehead. "You already do." The next morning, Edward went to the old harbour district where Merton had once kept his offices. The buildings were half deserted now, the air thick with salt and smoke. An old dockmaster remembered him. "I, Mr. Merton," the man said, "left here years back after some scandal with accounts. I heard he took lodgings in Greenwich near the river." Edward thanked him and left a note for Margaret before setting out again. By evening he reached a narrow street of boarding houses by the Thames. He knocked on the door of one. A tired-looking woman answered. "Merton?" he asked. She frowned. "Rowan Merton? He's here no longer. Moved out 2 weeks ago. Said he was heading north. Yorkshire way, I think." Edward felt his pulse quicken. "Did he say why?" She shook her head. "Only that he had business with old employers." He turned away, a chill running through him. North. To Yorkshire. To Ashford Manor. He hired a fresh horse and rode through the night. The moon broke through clouds, lighting the road like silver. By dawn he saw the familiar hills rising before him. When he reached the manor gates, the guard ran forward. "My lord," the man cried. "A stranger came during the night, said he was an old friend of your father's. He asked for you but left when we said you were away." Edward's voice was sharp. "Where did he go?" "He took the path toward the village, sir." Edward spurred his horse forward. The morning mist clung low to the fields. He rode hard, his heart pounding with dread. When he reached the village, the baker pointed toward the chapel hill. A man came by at sunrise asking after the manor. Rough-looking, carried a satchel. Edward galloped up the hill, the church bell tolling faintly in the distance. Near the crest he saw a figure standing by the old stone wall, a man of middle years, coat threadbare, face partly hidden by the brim of his hat. "Rowan Merton," Edward called. The man turned slowly. A faint smile curved his lips. "Ah, the Count himself. I wondered how long it would take." Edward dismounted, striding forward. "You forged the letter. You drove my wife from her home. I corrected an injustice," Merton said coolly. "Your father dismissed me with nothing. You inherited the fortune I built for him. Lydia Harcourt was my instrument, and your own sins made her useful. You used her and killed her." Merton's eyes glinted. She became inconvenient. "I warned her to keep silent. But she wrote too much." Edward's hands clenched. "You will answer for it." "I already have," Merton said quietly. "My days are numbered. But I thought you should know how fragile your honor truly was. One letter, and it crumbled. Edward took a step closer. You destroyed an innocent woman's life for revenge. And you, Merton said, destroyed it for vanity. We are not so different, my lord. Before Edward could reply, footsteps sounded behind him. He turned. Margaret was running up the hill, breathless, the nurse and child in the distance. "Edward!" she cried. "He came to the house. He left this." She held out a small parcel wrapped in paper. Edward tore it open. Inside lay the silver rattle of their son, tarnished but intact. Merton's voice drifted softly. "A reminder of what you nearly lost." Edward turned back, but the man was gone, vanished into the mist beyond the wall. He ran to the edge of the hill, but only the empty fields stretched below, the fog swallowing every trace. From the valley came the faint sound of hooves fading toward the woods. Edward stood motionless at the crest of the hill, the fog curling around him like breath. The sound of hooves faded into nothing. Margaret's voice broke through the silence. "Edward, what did he say? Who was that man?" He turned toward her, still gripping the rattle in his hand. "Rowan Merton, my father's former agent. He was behind it all. Lydia, the forged letter, everything. He sought revenge for his dismissal." Her eyes widened. "Revenge? After all these years?" "He blamed my father for his ruin," Edward said. "And when that could not be undone, he turned to ruin me instead. Lydia was his weapon." Margaret looked down at the silver rattle. "He left this to mock you." "No," Edward said slowly, "to remind me of what he failed to take." The child began to cry, startled by the chill wind. Margaret hushed him softly. Edward reached out and touched the tiny hand that gripped her shawl. "He will never come near us again," he said quietly. They returned to the manor under a lowering sky. The servants hurried to meet them, their faces anxious. Edward gave orders at once for the gates to be watched and messengers sent to the magistrate. By evening, all of Yorkshire would know that Rowan Merton was wanted for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. When the doors finally closed and the house settled into uneasy silence, Margaret turned to him. "Will you tell the magistrate everything?" "Yes," he said. "There will be no more secrets. Merton's lies end with him." She nodded slowly. "And if he is never found?" Edward met her gaze. "Then we will still be free. The truth is no less true because the guilty escape justice." She studied him for a moment, then reached for his hand. "You speak differently now, with peace, not pride." He smiled faintly. "I think I have learned what peace costs." That night rain began to fall. Edward could not sleep. He walked through the long corridors, past the nursery where Margaret sang softly to their son. He paused outside the door, listening to her voice. Steady, gentle, unbroken. For the first time the sound did not fill him with guilt, but with gratitude. The next morning brought an official letter from the magistrate. Merton had fled north toward Scotland. His trail was faint but clear. Edward read it without anger. "Let him run," he murmured. "His punishment is already upon him." Margaret, reading over his shoulder, whispered, "Then it is truly over." "Yes," he said, "at last." In the days that followed, life at Ashford Manor began to feel whole again. The servants smiled without hesitation. The neighbours, once curious and cautious, returned with warm congratulations. The air around the estate seemed lighter, touched with spring. One afternoon, Edward stood by the garden wall while Margaret supervised the planting of new rose bushes. Their son sat on a blanket in the grass, laughing as the nurse held a bright ribbon above his head. "You used to hate that sound," Margaret said with a smile. "I feared I didn't deserve it," Edward replied. "Now I can't imagine the world without it." She glanced at him. "What will you do now that the scandal is behind you?" "Live," he said simply. "Serve my people better than my father did. Perhaps even serve my wife better than I once did." Margaret's laughter was soft but real. "You have already begun." They walked through the garden together, their hands brushing now and then like a quiet promise. For the first time since their marriage, the silence between them held comfort rather than distance. That evening, as they dined with a few close friends, the conversation turned to Lydia Harcourt and the strange letters that had shadowed their lives. Lady Greville, a kindly woman with sharp eyes, spoke with sympathy. "My dear Lady Ashford, I always said the truth would find you. It may come slowly, but it comes. Margaret smiled faintly. Truth is patient, my lady. It waits until we are ready to face it. Edward raised his glass quietly. To truth, then, and to peace hard won. When their guests departed, the night outside was bright with stars. Margaret leaned against the doorway, watching the sky. It feels new, she said softly, as though we are beginning again. Edward joined her, his voice low. We are. In the following weeks, the manor was transformed. The chapel bell, silent for months, rang again on Sundays. The tenants came to celebrate the Count and Countess's return. Even the old gardener, who had once muttered about curses and lost blessings, declared the estate alive again. Yet beneath the renewal lay quiet reflection. Edward often walked the grounds at dusk, alone but not lonely. Margaret watched him from the window sometimes, knowing he no longer walked to escape his thoughts but to make peace with them. One afternoon, the steward brought word that the council in London had sent an official notice of closure regarding all matters tied to Lydia Harcourt's estate. There will be no further inquiries, my lord, he said. The Crown has accepted your testimony and Lady Ashford's account. The matter is concluded. Edward thanked him, then turned to Margaret. We are free of it, truly free. She smiled. Then let us bury the last of it and speak her name no more. He nodded. Agreed. Together they went to the chapel, where the air smelled faintly of lilac and stone. Edward placed the remaining letters, Lydia's confession and Merton's threats, into a small wooden box. He sealed it and handed it to the vicar. For the archives, he said. Let them rest there beyond curiosity. The vicar bowed. May the Lord grant you both peace. As they stepped back into the sunlight, Margaret looked up at Edward. It feels lighter now. It is, he said. We have carried that shadow long enough. In the days that followed, the household turned its attention to the future. Plans for the journey to Italy resumed. Margaret prepared clothes for the voyage, laughing as she measured small garments for their son. Edward watched her as she worked, struck by how the same woman who had once fled him now filled the house with warmth. On the morning of their departure, they stood together on the steps of the manor. The carriage waited, the sky clear. Margaret took one last look at the house. Do you think we shall ever see it again the same way? Edward smiled. No, it will always be different now, because it holds forgiveness. She squeezed his hand. Then it will always be home. They climbed into the carriage, the nurse and child beside them. The wheels began to turn. As the manor faded behind them, Margaret rested her head against his shoulder. Neither spoke for a long time. The rhythm of the road was steady, almost soothing. Hours later, as dusk settled, the carriage stopped at an inn for the night. The innkeeper hurried to greet them. My lord, my lady, a letter arrived here addressed to you both, delivered by a rider who said it was urgent. Edward frowned. For us? From whom? The man shook his head. He would not say, only that it was from the north. Margaret took the letter, her hands steady, but her heart uneasy. She broke the seal. Inside was a single page, the writing unfamiliar, the message brief. To the Count and Countess of Ashford, you need not fear the ghost of Rowan Merton. He is dead. His body was found at the foot of the northern cliffs, carried by the tide. The magistrate believes it was an accident. Margaret read the words aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. Edward took the paper, his jaw tightening as he read. So it ends, he said finally. He has met the justice he escaped. She reached for his hand. Then, let this be the end, truly. He nodded. Yes. No more letters, no more shadows. They ate a quiet supper by the fire, saying little. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying away the last of winter's chill. Later, as Margaret prepared for bed, she found Edward standing by the window, staring into the dark. Are you at peace now? She asked. He turned to her, his expression gentle. I think I am. For the first time, I see our lives not as a chain of mistakes, but as a path that led us here. She smiled softly. Then tomorrow let us begin the new chapter. Yes, he said, taking her hand. Tomorrow. The next morning sunlight streamed through the windows. The carriage waited once more, ready to carry them south toward the sea. The nurse bundled the child in a blanket, and Margaret laughed when he reached out for her necklace. As they drove away, the countryside unfolded in color, fields bright with spring, rivers gleaming like glass. Edward leaned back, his arm around his wife and child. For the first time, there was no past behind them to chase, only the future ahead. The road wound gently down toward the coast, where the air smelled of salt and promise. And at the moment the carriage reached the rise overlooking the sea, Margaret turned to Edward and said, "You have kept your vow, my love. We are free." The sea stretched before them like a sheet of silver, bright beneath the morning sun. The carriage stopped at the crest of the hill overlooking the coast, the horses tossing their heads impatiently. Edward stepped out first, the wind sweeping through his hair. He turned to help Margaret down. Her veil fluttered in the breeze, and for a moment she looked like the same girl he had once met in the garden of his father's house, full of grace and quiet fire. She took his hand, smiling faintly. "So, this is our new beginning. It feels like the first real one," he said. Below them, the town shimmered with the colors of spring, white sails, red roofs, and the faint scent of salt and lemon drifting from the shore. The sound of gulls mingled with laughter from the harbor. Their son reached for the air, his little hands waving toward the sea. Margaret laughed softly. "He thinks he can catch the wind." Edward's gaze lingered on her. "So did I once, but now I think the wind has caught us instead." She met his eyes, warmth rising in her cheeks. "Then let it take us somewhere gentle." They descended toward the harbor where a small vessel waited, a private sloop arranged by Lord Greville himself. The captain bowed as they approached. "The Morning Star, my lord. She'll carry you to Calais by sunset." Edward nodded. "Thank you." He turned to Margaret. "Are you ready?" She looked at the ship, then back at him. "Yes. For the first time, I'm not afraid of where we're going." They boarded together, the child in Margaret's arms, the nurse following behind. As the sails unfurled, the ship glided smoothly away from shore. The coastline receded, and the air grew soft and salt-sweet. Margaret leaned against the railing, watching the water shimmer. Edward stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. For a while neither spoke. At last she said, "Do you remember our first journey together? The one to Bath after our wedding?" "I remember every moment," he said. "You laughed the whole way, and I thought you had married a man far too solemn." "You were solemn," she said with a teasing glance. "But I liked that about you. It made me feel safe. I never imagined how pride could make a man so foolish." He smiled ruefully. "Nor did I. I thought love could survive neglect. I learned otherwise." She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "And yet here we are." He looked down at their joined hands. "Here we are. And I swear, Margaret, there will be no more nights lost to pride, no more days wasted on silence." Her voice softened. "Then let us seal that promise not with words but with life." He turned toward her, the light catching in her hair. For a moment he simply looked, at the eyes that had once glared with pain, now bright with peace, at the mouth that had once trembled with anger, now curved in forgiveness. The distance that had haunted them dissolved with a single breath. He leaned closer, his voice low. "You have no idea how I have dreamed of this moment." She smiled. "Then stop dreaming, Edward." Their lips met softly, and the world seemed to fall away. The salt air, the creak of ropes, even time itself. It was not the desperate kiss of lost lovers, but the steady, tender one of those who had found their way home. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his chest. "We are not who we were," she whispered. "No," he said. "We are better." Their son laughed nearby, his voice high and clear as a gull's cry. Margaret lifted him, pressing her cheek to his. "He will never know what it means to lose us," she said. Edward looked at them both, his heart swelling. "He will only know what it means to be loved." The hours passed in gentle rhythm. By evening, the coast of France rose in the distance, pale and golden in the fading light. Margaret stood at the bow, the wind lifting her veil. Edward came behind her, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. "Cold?" he asked. "Only from the sea," she said, leaning back against him. "It's strange to think of everything we've left behind." "Not strange," he said. "Necessary." She turned her face slightly toward him. "Do you regret anything?" He thought for a moment. "Only the time I wasted not knowing how to love you properly." Her fingers touched his cheek. "And now?" "Now I would spend the rest of my life making up for it." When they reached Calais, twilight painted the harbor in violet and rose. The innkeeper who met them was cheerful and kind, leading them to a small seaside villa lent by a family friend. Inside, a fire burned in the hearth. Margaret looked around the room. Simple, warm, peaceful. "It feels like a home," she said softly. Edward came behind her, resting his hands on her shoulders. "Because you're in it." That night, after their son slept, they sat together by the window. The moonlight spilled across the floor, silvering everything it touched. Margaret turned her face toward him, her expression unguarded. "Tell me something," she said quietly. "Anything. When did you stop loving her?" He hesitated only a moment. "The moment I realized I could lose you." She looked down. "And when did you start loving me again?" He reached for her chin, lifting it gently. "I never stopped, Margaret. I only forgot what it meant." Her eyes softened, but she said nothing. He stood, offering his hand. "Come," he said. She rose, her fingers slipping into his. He led her onto the balcony, where the sea whispered below. The air was cool and filled with the scent of night. He turned her toward him, his voice barely above the wind. "I have carried too many words of regret," he said. "Tonight I want to speak only of what will be." "Then speak," she whispered. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You will never again doubt that you are the heart of my life. You will never again wait alone for a man who should have been beside you. From this day until my last, I will honor the woman who taught me that love is not a privilege. It is a gift." She closed her eyes for a moment, the tears catching in her lashes. "And I will never again doubt that forgiveness can heal anything." He drew her closer. "Then we are whole." Their kiss deepened, slow and tender, the years of distance melting into warmth. The world beyond the balcony faded into sound and light, the surf against the rocks, the distant hum of the town, the steady beat of their hearts. When at last they parted, she rested against him, her voice soft. "Do you believe in destiny, Edward?" "I believe in grace," he said, "and in second chances." They stayed on the balcony until the stars burned bright. When they returned inside, the fire had dimmed, but the air was still warm. They sat side by side before it, hands entwined, watching the flames dance. Margaret spoke first. "Do you think people change?" "Yes," he said, "but not because they wish to, because love leaves them no choice." She smiled faintly. "Then we have both changed." He brushed his thumb over her wedding ring. "Not changed, become what we were meant to be." Outside, the sea sighed against the shore. The sound filled the room like a lullaby. Margaret leaned against him, her eyes heavy with peace. Days passed softly in France. They walked through the streets of Calais, visited the market where fishermen called to one another in cheerful tones, and watched their son chase pigeons across the square. The townspeople smiled to see them, an English couple, graceful and quiet, marked by something unspoken that drew affection without words. In the evenings they dined by the sea, laughing easily. Edward found himself telling her stories from his youth, the foolish things he had never thought to share before. She listened with amusement, her eyes glowing in the lamplight. One night, as they walked along the shore, Margaret stopped to look at the moon reflected on the water. "Do you think we will ever return to Yorkshire?" "Perhaps," he said, "when our son is old enough to remember it with joy, not sorrow." She nodded. "Then let that be our promise, to return when joy calls us home." He smiled. "And until then, we build a new life here." The weeks turned into months. Spring gave way to early summer. Their villa became a haven of laughter and light. Edward began to write letters to his steward, sending money to restore the village school and repair the church roof. Margaret taught their son to walk among the garden paths, her laughter mingling with his delighted cries. One afternoon, as the three of them picnicked beneath the olive trees, Margaret turned to Edward with a smile that carried both mischief and tenderness. "Do you remember what you once told me, that forgiveness is given, not earned?" "I do," he said. "Then I should tell you something," she said, her voice low. "I forgive you not because you earned it, but because I learned that love is larger than pride." He looked at her with quiet awe. "You have given me back my soul. And you," she said softly, "have given me back my trust." He reached for her hand, pressing it to his lips. "Then we are even." She laughed. "Even? Never. You will spend the rest of your life proving yourself still." "I intend to," he said. That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of gold, Edward stood by the balcony again, watching the light fade over the sea. Margaret joined him, slipping her arm through his. Their son slept peacefully inside, the faint sound of his breathing carrying through the open door. "Do you ever think of what might have been," she asked softly, "if none of this had happened?" He smiled faintly. "Sometimes. But then I remember that we would never have known what love truly was. We would have lived easily, but not deeply." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Then we have lived deeply enough for a lifetime." The last of the sun disappeared beyond the horizon. Edward turned her gently toward him, his eyes shining in the dim light. "Margaret," he whispered, "when I lost you, I learned that love is not the possession of joy, but the courage to face sorrow together. And when I found you again, I understood that forgiveness is love's highest form." She touched his cheek, her eyes glistening. "Then let us never speak of sorrow again," he smiled. "Only of love." Their lips met once more, slow and certain, the kind of kiss that holds both an ending and a beginning. The sea sang below, the stars trembled above, and for the first time the world seemed entirely still. When they drew apart, Margaret whispered, "Do you hear it? The sea?" he asked. "No," she said, smiling through her tears. "Peace." He held her close, the sound of their child's soft breathing mingling with the hush of waves. Morning came bright and warm. The sun spilled through the windows, painting the room in gold. Margaret woke to the sound of Edward's laughter as he played with their son by the window. She lay still for a moment, watching them, her heart full. When Edward turned and saw her awake, he crossed the room in 2 strides. "Good morning, my love," he said, his voice full of quiet joy. She reached for him, drawing him down beside her. "Good morning, Edward." Outside, the waves rolled gently against the shore, carrying away the last whisper of the past. And in that soft light, holding each other close, they began at last to live the life they had nearly lost. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.